Hello and welcome to a Saturday edition of the Managing Madrid Podcast. I'm your host, Kiyan Sobhani, and I am joined by Jose Perez, who has been here throughout this entire World Cup. And it's always a pleasure having him on. And he's with us until the end of this tournament and beyond. And Siddharth Ramsundar, who is making his return, I guess, because it's been a while since he's been on. We've had him a few times in the summertime. I don't know if we've had him on since, but we're recording this some 30 minutes or so after France squeaked by England in the World Cup quarterfinals and advanced to the semifinals. We have also not discussed in podcast form the Croatia-Brazil game, which was obviously very, very heavy in Madridista players. And we're gonna talk about that as well. And then after that, whatever things from the World Cup that we want to talk about. It's been a crazy World Cup so far. So why don't we start with you, Sid, because it's been so long since we've had you on. How you been holding up? You enjoying the World Cup?
I've been loving the World Cup. I've just been in the middle of a lot of rebranding across all social media platforms, and just as a result, I've been taking my time. But I always would love to come on, talk about Madrid, and hopefully give the people some predictions that come true. I always love doing that. And I've been loving the World Cup. Obviously, there's been a lot surrounding it politically, and that's one side of any industry, including sports. And then there's been the sporting side of it, which has been absolutely phenomenal. I can't believe it. 18 months ago, I was kind of bored of Real Madrid and bored of soccer. And then last season happened, the best Real Madrid season ever, maybe. And then now this World Cup, maybe the best World Cup on the pitch ever. I can't complain.
You're back in. I've had those moments before, just growing up. There's moments where it's it's kind of getting boring. And I just start watching basketball just every night instead. And then they just suck me back in. There's cycles to this, I think, and I think in part it has to do with the excitement on the pitch, and its ability to draw you in or draw you out. Jose, France, England,
Yes.
Another cagey one. They've all been pretty cagey in this round.
Yes. Hello everyone. Always happy to be back and discussing more World Cup stuff. This one was a very close one. I like it. This is one of those, it felt a lot like that Spain Germany, where you just look at it and it's like a very kind of Champions League quality game with Champions League quality players, and there's just it's just one with a lot of high level football. I would say this is probably France's poorest performance up to now in the tournament, and that is in no small part due to England having one of their best performances under Southgate. I would say they were really good at kind of pressing and short circuiting that what the French usually do in possession. And then I think they did a fairly good job at trying to dismantle that French defense, and they came pretty close to it. It really, this one really just boiled down to the big moments and to big players being efficient in the big moments. In the end, it's like Griezmann, Giroud, Tchouameni did their stuff in the right moments and were efficient. England, not so much. And that's really what the difference was in this game.
It's I would agree that this was England's best performance of the World Cup, and maybe, as you put it, at one of the best under Southgate, full stop. It's funny, and I've been saying it all along that, a lot of these questions we have about these big teams who looked so dominant to start this tournament, whether it be France, whether it be Brazil, whether it be, I don't know who else fits that mold really off the top of my Spain against Costa Rica, for example. There's questions that were like, okay, let's just wait until the big tests come to see if those weaknesses will be exploited. Some people said hey, you're overreacting, just enjoy the game. Every team has their strengths and weaknesses, and that's true. But I'm always just curious, okay, when it really matters, let's see what happens. And we kind of saw that with Brazil a little bit. We saw it now, France, England. This is kind of the biggest test they've both faced in this World Cup. And I was impressed with England, but such is the reality, is that France are so talented that the margin of error against them is so small that doesn't matter how good you are, you got to be perfect. And unfortunately, as cruel as it sounds, hitting one of two of your penalties is just not perfect enough to get the job done against this team that has just so much talent and so many moments of individual brilliance that can it's just harder to squeak by those teams who have so much talent and are so good. And I just found that the level of football in this game was also pretty high from both teams. But certainly I thought this was the most quote unquote trouble I've seen France in so far. Sid, the level of football in this game. Do you want to speak about that a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. I think one of the main takeaways from this game, I guess the post-mortem on England, so to speak, if this is Southgate's last game, maybe in charge, who knows, is that this was the result of years of footballing trends coming to light. And this wasn't just Southgate's England. We're talking about Guardiola going to England, players like Phil Foden getting developed into these world conquerors, Saka from Arteta as a result of Guardiola. And then, the way these guys interpret the game, the English players, the way they interpret the game, it's just so positional. It's so good because they know how to make defenders have to answer questions they don't want to answer. They ask really good questions. And Saka, especially when he drove into the box all game, it was so good. That was just like symbolic of what's changed in England. And it really started like this day was set in motion when Leicester City won the Premier League all those years ago. And every top team was just put on signal, yo, we got to get good coaching in England. And for me, this is the culmination of all that. And we saw a very modern team playing a very modern brand of football. Grace Robertson, one of the top football writers, had been saying that England need to go 4-3-3. I had agreed England need to go 4-3-3. I think Southgate errs on the side of going too defensive in games like these. And yeah, they got the offensive balance right. And I think Tchouameni, at the end of the day, he had a lot to do. And if his early goal, it was a bit of a double-edged sword because I believe on one end, I believe it got France to stop attacking with the same verb and it allowed England to grow into the game. So in that sense, it was like once Tchouameni scored, it was likely that we'd see some of the best flowing football England's ever played. It's a big high pressure moment. And that's why I was so excited. A lot of international football has been changing. We're seeing like literally human psychology play out in front of us where we see different types of styles and ideologies come to the fore. And this is the first time the international game has really started to resemble the club game in some really fundamental ways because of how the coaches are evolving. And that's what I loved about this game. It was a phenomenal tactical game of the highest level.
As much as I understand how much tactics can change based on if you're ahead of goal or behind the goal or if it's tied, depending on your strengths and your weaknesses, the fact that you pointed out France's performance before and after Tchouameni's goal, it's just like the level of fun of a team from a viewer standpoint, like compared to when they're behind or they're ahead. There's so much of that fluctuation this World Cup. We saw with the Netherlands, if they're losing, or if they're winning, or if they're drawn level, or the US. They just go to another level of fun if they have to chase the goal and they have to score. It's just so much more fun to watch them play in those situations. But yeah, France kind of took their foot off the pedal a bit. And also, I mean, the other aspect of this is that England also picked up the ball really well and tried to get into dangerous positions. Jose, do you want to talk about Tchouameni's performance? In some ways, a mixed bag. I thought that you rightfully pointed out on Twitter that this may have been the first time this tournament that we felt the absence of like an N'Golo Kante to help defensively. Just in their third.
And I think a lot of this, like maybe it was already there, but it's just France hadn't faced a team that could test them defensively as much as England did. Like thinking about it, there wasn't really an opponent that could really test them out as much. And that's when you start really seeing the cracks in the defensive system. And I wonder even like, okay, next game against Morocco, yeah, they're a good team, but I don't think they will hurt France in the same way that England could, because the key thing here is that when you see France defend, like what's interesting is the behavior of the midfielders, because instead of like staying narrow and trying to give more coverage in the area in front of the box in the center areas, you actually saw the interior staying very wide to try to prevent England from doing because England was trying to do these put the midfielders out wide like Henderson and try to do these wide overloads. So the midfielders were moving out to try to prevent those. But then the whole area in front of the box was mostly uncovered, partly because of the midfielders doing that, partly because France's defensive line went really back and as close to their keeper as they could. So you had that zone that was often open, where often Tchouameni is the only one covering it, and that puts Tchouameni, and that's something that England could play around with, because you could move Tchouameni out of position a lot, because he has to go and track just by having certain runners and making Tchouameni track those runners. So the most problematic one and the biggest duel tonight was that Tchouameni versus Bellingham, which was quite fun, because it's really Bellingham trying to move. So this time around, I would say we saw maybe a less impactful Bellingham, because he was mostly playing more ahead of the ball, being kind of the more advanced midfielder, kind of trying to focus on just moving, trying to make runs and moving defenders, especially Tchouameni, out of position. So that was the most problematic one. Then in the second half, England's combinations on the right started to get even better, and then Saka started moving inside, and that started to generate further problems, because it wasn't just the penalty that Tchouameni ended up committing, but just generally every time he was going inside, then that puts Tchouameni in a decisional crisis of do I go for this guy, but I have Bellingham behind me, so what do I do? So that's a complicated thing, and there wasn't really anyone supporting Tchouameni in those phases. So that was so it's just a situation where he didn't have much help. I thought that England didn't fully exploit that area, they didn't exploit that area fully. But yeah, I would say that this is a game where maybe in some situations Tchouameni didn't make the best choices, or make the best choices of who to track or execute things as well, hence the penalty. But also he was in a context where frankly the French defense was just being completely overwhelmed.
You made that entire great analysis of some of their midfield problems and some of the burden that Tchouameni had. And honestly, just to be completely fair, I do think why he could have used some help. There were definitely some moments that he could have done better, whether it was on the ball, whether it was overcommitting on Saka. I was really impressed with Saka this game, but also on that particular play, the way he splits two defenders with the give and go in the box, gets it back, and just takes a touch past Tchouameni. Tchouameni has to do better in those situations. The goal was incredible. It was just perfectly placed. The weight. I watched it again, and I was like, at first glance, in my mind, just the way he struck it, you would have thought he had acres of space and he was running onto it full force. He takes one touch to open it up and has no wind up. He just smacks it, and that's with Bellingham closing him down. Incredible goal. But you made that analysis, and just looking at it now, I don't know why it didn't occur to me in real time. Maybe other smarter people than me picked up on it. France made one sub in this game, and it was Coman for Dembele. And that was it. And I just wonder, given some of those issues, if Camavinga doesn't get in a game like this, I guess I don't know if he's going to play again this World Cup, but
no, very likely. That's very likely not happening. And yeah, going also after the things that Tchouameni could have done better. I mean, still Tchouameni's main area of improvement as a defender is that he's still much more of he's still much better at, say, tracking, at going man for man than defending spaces. That area of staying back and defending spaces is where he still has to do some improvement. Of course, if you have a team that has to defend more aggressively, that has to press forward, that has to counter press quickly after losing the ball, those situations where he has to go forward and defend, that's easier for Tchouameni. Then if you have to be more passive and defend spaces more frequently, he still struggles a bit more in those contexts. And this was the one game where France really had to be more about defending space than defending specific players. And we could see that he was struggling there.
Yeah, I would just say I was gonna say that brings me to talk about the main protagonists of this game, the big narrative winners. Obviously, unfortunately, one of the big losers is Harry Kane in the sense that this was obviously one of his best shots at maybe winning the trophy itself. And since he plays for Tottenham, he doesn't get too many chances at big trophies. And he missed the penalty that everyone's going to talk about. I think that's an interesting one. I thought a lot of people were saying that Kane's penalty miss was shocking. And I think it's because his demeanor and the way he prepares and the way he plays the game, the way he strikes the ball, you don't expect that to happen in a moment like this. But I just want to say that Kane is still an incredible player. And however, he did not take the opportunity to add to his legacy tonight. On the other hand, I think Rafa Varane was amazing tonight. I think if we say Tchouameni struggled to defend space, I thought the main reason France survived is because their rear guard was really good at committing tackles or just being physical at the very end when it really mattered. Even if England broke into the half spaces, they got Tchouameni defending more than he could. Their center backs, their back four really formed a compact block near the defense that saved them, is my opinion. And yeah, I thought Varane's experience showed tonight. I think there's been a lot of cases over the years where people didn't watch Varane. They thought he was only rated because he played for Real Madrid. And I thought it was cool that Varane made it through tonight. And another player who I think was big was Giroud, in the sense that tonight might have cemented him as clearly one of the best target men to ever play the game, as far as his genuine ability to hold up the ball, his height. I think, the whole thing about Benzema playing, I think we all can agree it's been overplayed. I think they could have been good with Benzema too. But what Giroud does is physically hold back defenders in a way that even Benzema can't, because he's not that big. So that battering ram function is something that almost no player in the history of the game has used before. And I think this was a big moment for Giroud more than anything with the winning goal. Any thoughts there?
I mean, it's Jose and I I think the last time we talked about that particular thing was after France's first game of the World Cup. And we discussed, Giroud, because Giroud's been good this whole time. Like, it wasn't just today, right? And now we have a big sample size, like I mentioned to Jose, like, okay, like, let's pump the brakes about this discussion about Giroud complimenting France better, because you never know, like 2-3 games down from here, the narrative can shift. He can just be terrible. And then we're going to be like, man, if only Benzema was there. I got to say, Giroud has been even like there was one that he missed in the first half. I don't even know how he got his head to the ball. Like, he's like diving on the floor and in traffic, and he connects with it. His ability to get to the cross is really, really impressive. The header looked less. It was an awesome header. The goal he scored at this 2-1, a little bit less impressive on the replay when you see it kind of hits off of Maguire's shoulder and then completely changes the direction of the ball. But so the Giroud Benzema thing is basically comes down to this for me, is that Benzema and Mbappe and Griezmann have a similar profile in that they're both great at link-up play. They're both great at the creative element from deeper positions. Benzema and Griezmann in particular do a lot of defensive work. And I just wonder if it's a lot of chefs in the kitchen type deal. And I'm not saying it can't work, because they won the UEFA Nations League with those three. But they also, like Benzema and Mbappe, also like to hug the left side. The dynamic would have just been completely different. And maybe France are, beating England 4-0 today. I don't know, for whatever reason, if Benzema's on the field. I just don't know. But you can't argue with what's happening right now. And Giroud just fits in what they're doing. Jose, do you have any additional thoughts since our last discussion on this?
No, not really. I mean, yeah, the main difference between having Benzema and Giroud in this team. By the way, like we already know that even without having to be. So one thing I agree with Sid is that because Giroud is bigger, he can pin defenders better. And well, not just big, but he's also more static. So he spends more time pinning defenders than Benzema does. And generally, Benzema will be a striker who's intervenes more in the game than Giroud does. So like Giroud is like a 20 passes per game striker. Benzema will be like a 35 to 40 passes per game striker. Like he just intervenes a lot more. And that requires different mechanisms, because it means that unlike Giroud, like he won't be in the box the whole time. And it means that France would need to compensate that in some way. And yeah, like let's just say that with Giroud, France can simplify how they play in a way that maybe they could not have done it with Benzema. That's really kind of the summary. Is that better, worse? I guess we'll never know. That's really the summary of it.
I just have one thing to add there. Based on French reporting, especially from Romain Molina, it seems that Griezmann was the player who really didn't like it when Benzema came onto the team and left. And I think that's the most interesting narrative thread here, because essentially you sacrifice Griezmann, let's just say, and you play Benzema, Dembele, and Mbappe. That's still enough runners to play fast and long, in my opinion. However, the guy who loses out in that situation is Griezmann, because his role completely changes if he's not the guy dictating the counters. Benzema chooses to intervene. And yeah, those two, I don't feel they played that well off each other. In my opinion, last Euros, Pogba, Benzema, Mbappe, they all looked phenomenal when they needed to offensively sometimes, especially in the knockouts when we went down 1-0 in the last game they lost, and they scored 3 goals in such a short spell. And the problem was defense, I thought. And really what it comes down to is identity more than anything. I think France got lost between identities when Benzema played. And more than anything, it's because Griezmann got lost between styles, and France just don't, it's just how a team environment works. Sometimes you shift some pieces a certain way and the whole team loses its identity. And this is one of those weird cases, I think, where I do think Benzema might have affected the team dynamic in a certain way where possibly they don't have as much clarity. But yeah, other than that, Giroud, I don't think there have been many players with his profile who do the work he does the way he does. I think if Giroud played for any national team, it's possible he makes other strikers look a little weird sometimes. Maybe he does this to other forwards on other national teams. But, to me, he's still a go-kart, but he did really well.
I mean, I find it really fascinating. There's, I think, 2 threads of conversation here. One, I'll just diverge really quickly, but I've watched a lot of Giroud at Milan, and he's been good, but he hasn't been this good. And I just always find it interesting, the difference in level between performances at the World Cup and at club level. There are so many players who just are amazing in the World Cup, and it doesn't necessarily translate to club level. And then a lot of players will hopefully get signed. I hope for them. They get big contracts after this, but it just doesn't always translate to club football for whatever reason. Like a lot of Morocco's team individually, they're scattered around, some of them in Spain, some of them across Europe, and they're not really that. But when you put them together in this system and this cohesiveness and this unity and this kind of friendship and bond, it performs in a different level. And I always find that really interesting. So that was on the side, but there's another element to this. The domino of Benzema being there still would have been, I don't think it would have been Griezmann that loses out. So let's assume because he's there, Benzema starts, because he's Karim Benzema. That's Benzema starting, Mbappe is for sure starting. I think the other one he doesn't bench in this situation is probably Griezmann, which means you'd lose the runner in Dembele on the other side. Maybe this World Cup would have been different because Pogba and Kante aren't there. And because Pogba's creativity from midfield is missing, Griezmann would have been playing in midfield anyway. But then what does that look like if it's Griezmann, Benzema, and Mbappe and Dembele? I may just be fascinating to see that we can't discredit Benzema as the target man. I know Giroud has been an amazing target, but Benzema is a pretty amazing target himself. The main difference is that I think Benzema may not be in those positions all the time as Giroud is, because, as Jose said, he's a little bit less static,
I think Benzema is less of a threat without a running start, in my opinion. I think so. If he's just with the defender one-on-one, I don't think he's nearly as much of a threat to the defender. But since Benzema is often on the move, the defender rarely knows where he is. And especially when it comes to headers, he always has the angles on you. Giroud, you don't need much of an angle. Just send it where he is and he'll bother the defender. But yeah, that's all on this subject for now. It's
You nearly cut out there for a sec. I think Benzema's agent was about to pull the cord on your connection. He's listening. You're gonna get a ton of hate mail from Benzema fans after this podcast. Also, are those blue light glasses?
Yeah, they are.
Nice.
Yeah, it's I was watching the games with them too. It's fun. I like it.
I lost mine and I have to get a new pair.
Yeah.
But every time I wore them, someone in the comments would keep on saying, "Why does Kiyan keep wearing glasses he doesn't need?"
Yeah, I mean, hey, it lets me be on Twitter more. It lets me podcast more. If any of you are wondering, it lets me just do this stuff more. That's why I wear it. Keeps me.
Well, then
keeps
keep putting them on if it brings you on the podcast. Jose, anything else from England, France that you wanted to tackle?
Well, let's see. I regarding Tchouameni, I think I've mostly covered everything. Like, then in possession, like this was a complicated game for France in possession because just things didn't go, like they just couldn't connect the way they usually do. It was and I think you guys have a really good point with the whole, like, it was a different game after the French goal. Like, it looked, because it actually looked good, like in the first 15 minutes or so, with France actually making good touches, playing their way out of the English press. Then afterwards, everything kind of came apart after the goal. And it's kind of hard to understand how France goes from playing through the press at first to like just struggling to put plays together. But it is, but it is what it is. And of course, in those contexts, it, like, that's when you, like, sure, like Tchouameni is good, but he cannot be like a one-man defensive and possession system. It's just hard for him. Like, he cannot make miracles. He cannot cover all of the all of the front of the box himself. He can give you that first pass in possession, but then if the other things in the system are not there, then so it's just I think the nice thing about Tchouameni is that he's one of those, like, I like to call them like thermometer players, that if they're doing badly, it's probably because the rest of the team is doing badly. Like, it's hard. Like, I think it's hard. It would be hard to see situations, because there are players that are fluctuate more in their performance, and the team can be having a good day, but they'll have a bad day. No, with Tchouameni, it's usually it will correlate a lot more strongly with team performance. So if he's having a bad day, probably the rest of the team is having a bad day, and that's pretty much what happened today.
Well, another part of this too is that I find it interesting that if you look at it, England had a lot more of the ball than France did. And when France would bring the ball out of the back, you would often see Bellingham off the ball, man marking Tchouameni, make sure he doesn't get it. And I think he could have also, this is funny because it just sounds like we're saying that anytime Tchouameni plays bad, it's not his fault. And if he's great, it's always credit to him. So like, he's just like always like, he's just blameless for the rest of his career now. But he also could have used some help in the build-up phase with Griezmann, I think, dropping a little bit deeper and all that stuff. And I think, yeah, that you can notice it. And part of the reason you can notice it more today is because this was the best opponent that they faced so far. And that's that. But I did want to say this about France. I just feel like the eye test tells me that they have a gear that no other teams can't go to. Like, it took them 15 minutes to score the go-ahead goal after Kane equalized, and they sat back a little bit before that. I just, and this comes down really to me to one player, and that is like Mbappe just does things no one in the world is doing right now. Like, you look at it, it just feels like he's a different level to the other 21 players on the field. There's a gear he can go to, and there's a gear that France can go to because of him on the field that I just don't know. Like, all I read on Twitter all game was Kyle Walker is the secret to stopping Mbappe. And like, Kyle Walker is a really, really good defender, like really good. And I think he did a really good job on Mbappe for some of this game. But then there's like that one sequence where Mbappe just keeps dropping his shoulder and just keeps cooking him, and then stops and then cooks him again, and then ultimately just goes past him. I just don't know if there's any other player in the tournament left that can do that right now. And I don't know. I'm not going to say favorites, because favorites means nothing to me. We've seen it in the Champions League. We've seen it in the World Cup. Favorites means nothing. But like, certainly they got to look at Brazil being eliminated now. And to me, that was one of the biggest barriers that they had was Brazil, I think. And Portugal's gone now. Now watch, Morocco will just beat them too. So there's no point in talking about this. But yeah, I just feel like, I don't know how you guys feel, but I just feel like France have a gear that they can go to. And if they get a little bit uncomfortable, they can hit into that gear. And I think they did that today against England.
That's also the feeling I got. Like that moment where like France concedes the goal, and then right after Mbappe goes and burns Kyle Walker on those runs, like that's when you start like that, like, and it was just right after, and that's when you realize, okay, these guys can switch up a gear if they want to, and that is, and I mean, that is the feeling that you get, like that France started the game on high gear, got the goal they needed, then afterwards they just kind of sat it out, and then once they had to go up a gear again, they could do it. That being said, even after France needed that goal, it was still a bit more of a back and forth, and it was like a pretty enjoyable part of the game. But yeah, in general, I do agree that France are one of those teams that just conserve their energy a lot. They really just go up the gear whenever it's necessary. The main thing is that for this France team, I would say that this France team are less comfortable on defense than they were 4 years ago, in my opinion. Like there were still some good performances in defense. They still, like Sid mentioned, Varane had a really good game. Upamecano struggled a bit at first with Kane, but then things got better as the game went on. So, but despite those good center back performances in general, I think this France team is not as comfortable as they were 4 years ago in this regard. I mean, and it kind of makes sense. I mean, before, like, you had that. You had Pogba in national team mode, which is completely different player. You had Kante and you had Matuidi in that midfield unit. That's a different level of defensive coverage, because right now it's really a lot of the, like I mentioned, like covering the center a lot of the time. It's just whatever Tchouameni can do. So, and he does what he can, but it's not the same level of coverage in midfield areas. So it is not the same defensive unit as it was before this team. So in those phases where it decides to slow down, I think it's easier to score against them than it was 4 years ago. Because 4 years ago, they could really put a game to rest. Like they just scored one, and then they could just keep the whole thing 1-0 if they wanted. They did that against Uruguay last time. They did that against Belgium during the 2018 World Cup. I think it's harder for them to shut down games that way now. So it's a bit more dangerous whenever they decide to just sit back and go back to that more defensive plan.
I've thought a lot about this because I've been thinking about this the whole tournament, because France are great, but they're different. And I feel like that's been one of the overriding themes of the tournament. Are they still great enough to win 4 years later? So, I mean, there are a lot of similarities between this time and last time. And I'm going to make a bit of a large point here. But, Luka Modric is in the semifinals again. France are in the semifinals again. They have a higher gear. They still have Mbappe. But I think, firstly, the game has changed. And I think France's defense has been impressive for me, because I think England's offense this year was much more tactically cohesive than what Belgium produced in 2018. Even though Belgium had Eden Hazard and Kevin De Bruyne and Lukaku, don't get me wrong, Eden Hazard that year was probably better than maybe any attacker at this World Cup, frankly. Like, that's quite possible. So Eden Hazard was incredible, but outside Hazard, Belgium was not like some genius possession unit whatsoever. They were a fantastic transition unit. You could get De Bruyne, Lukaku, Hazard to go fast, but I remember the way the French defended that game. I don't know if they would have the same opportunity. I think England's offense was much better spaced, simply.
True.
And now let's look at the remaining teams, though, because England was the toughest team, arguably, they had left. It's Croatia, who can't really play offense, but they are incredible psychologically and tactically. And then Argentina, who are solid. They have Messi and they play great defense. And then Morocco, who play incredible defense. And out of these teams, I agree that France have the highest gear. My thing is, without Pogba, are they necessarily going to be able to break through Morocco? Tchouameni scored today, but I am not that convinced that they go up in every game. And if the game goes to penalties, it's anyone's game. So that's where I'm at right now. I don't know if they like what happened today. We saw Tchouameni broke open the game, and then Giroud got an open header. I don't think it'll be as easy for Giroud to get headers against Morocco, and that's where it gets interesting because I think all the remaining teams are capable of taking France all the way through extra time. That's my take right now. And I'm not going to guess the penalty shootout. I'm not. But I just don't feel like they're as penalty proof. Like when Croatia went up in the World Cup final in 2018, France just sliced them. They sliced them up. Pogba went crazy. They won. They just too much individual talent. If a similar situation happens now, I know they'll turn it up. But let's say it's the 85th minute and then some team suddenly scores. It's not as simple for me because it really comes down to how much I rate Paul Pogba. No matter how good this French team is, Griezmann, Mbappe's gotten better, Giroud's great. I think that man really had something special in the way he could just impact the game in the final third from wherever he was on the pitch. Without that magic wand, I think France are more vulnerable. And that's why I think there's maybe a higher chance one of the other three teams wins, or there's a decent chance.
My uncle who supports Portugal asked me yesterday, so who do you think Portugal will face in the final? You think it's going to be Argentina? Like who as like I don't have you watched Morocco play this tournament? I don't know. Don't be so sure of yourself. And lo and behold, they're in the semifinals, and I'm fascinated to see it. We kind of know how the game is going to play out, at least from a tactical perspective, and we're going to see how that plays out. Jose, you look like you were going to say something, and then we can transition to Croatia, Brazil.
Yeah, this is gonna like the next few games for the next few games for France are gonna be an interesting one because so with Morocco, like it's been interesting because I think today's performance helps me. Like I think I was a bit harsh on Spain after now looking at today's game. I was a bit harsh on Spain because yes, Spain has the disadvantage that they didn't really have any world-class talent in their forward line. That being said, looking at how much Portugal conceded today, it does because when I was looking at the Spain game, I thought this is too conservative. They can do more. But then after today, you realize if Spain hadn't been so conservative, Morocco probably would have gotten more attacks than what they did against Spain. So so I was thinking, okay, this time so Portugal are taking more risks, but they have more talent to throw at Morocco, and eventually that can break them. It did not happen. So now in the next one, Morocco are really gonna face like some of the most devastating talents in this competition, like just which is mostly having to deal with, say, Griezmann, for example, Griezmann's final ball. Whenever Mbappe, obviously Mbappe being the most decisive player arguably in this tournament, or who knows, maybe Dembélé decides to wake up and have a good day because it's kind of a 50-50 coin, because if he decides to have a good game, then it gets even more difficult for the opposition. So this is kind of the biggest test of how much can Morocco's defensive block, like how much talent can this Moroccan defensive block resist? I mean, the main argument against France, and this is going back to the whole thing about Deschamps not doing substitutions today, because of all the injuries, this French squad does not have the same tools to change games that we would have normally expected of France. Just too many injuries have racked up. You can still they can still put Coman, for example, but just generally it's not this. Let's just say that putting in Coman and Randall Colomwani is not the same thing as like the things that the French had before on the bench. So now it's harder for them to to change games in second halves. They don't have the depth of squad that they had before, and that we'll see. That might come to bite them at some point. I mean, it almost came close to, but it almost did today.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Look, my sense is I remain harsh on Spain. I will unapologetically grill them even after what I watched today with Portugal, because I feel like Portugal did a better job of getting into the box and getting in and creating a little change. And I think maybe if you replay that game, maybe they win that 7 times out of 10. And I think with Spain, it was almost too conservative. And my hottest take from that game was that Spain were playing defensive football just with the ball at their feet. And and Morocco were doing it off the ball. That's my take from that game. And I also think like Brazil, this is going to bring Brazil into this, because I think if Brazil plays Morocco, I think they're scoring a couple goals at least. And I thought, despite losing the Croatian penalty shootouts, I thought played a really good game. I mean, they should have won that game, I think, in regulation, at the very least in extra time. They created so many chances, they didn't finish them. And I'm not taking any credit away from Croatia. We might as well talk about it now. I think Croatia, as Sid put it earlier, have a psychological element to it where they can create an XG of 0.4 against Brazil and beat them. I don't know if many teams in the world can do that. And up until the very end, look mentally strong and convert all 4 of their penalties and have the experience to do it. And I'm blown away about how good Croatia have been. Because after the first game, after the first game of the tournament, Croatia versus Morocco, who would have thought after their performances in that game that those two would be in the semifinals here? We're talking about it. It's just a testament. It doesn't matter how you start the tournament. It matters how you finish it. We've seen it so many times now. But yeah, I was super impressed with Croatia. And not to take away anything from Morocco, I think Morocco have been awesome. I like really, really good. There's so many great things you can say about their discipline, their defensive organization. I think if they had like one extra like lethal counterattacker, they'd be winning these games probably 2-0 instead of 1-0. But they've done their job well. So why don't we talk about Croatia,
or CH making better decisions, which
or ZH being at a better level, for sure. Croatia, Brazil. Why don't you start with you, Sid?
I have some really cool thoughts on this, because these games in the World Cup are starting to evolve and resemble the sort of games I've seen in FIFA over the years. It's like the sort of meta that I came to expect football to get to. At some stage, I expected it to get here, where essentially tournament football teams realize like pressing is stupid because you're giving up space and taking risks. And once teams started realizing risk-free football is like the safest way to play tournaments, that means either passing it around defensively or defending in a block and like just, only pressing when the opposition takes a heavy touch, the way Morocco do. And both the way those styles are equally good, but Croatia for me are crazy because the way they just took the air out of the game against Brazil, the way Modric just like literally just got the attackers to come and dance with him, it was incredible. He's like, he gets the ball, he waits for Neymar, Vinicius, Rodrigo, Richarlison, you name it. He lets them come dance. He turns a couple times, passes it somewhere. They go sprint like crazy. And then the Croatian defender passes it somewhere else. Boom, press over, sting taken out of game. Brazil press starts over. Clock ticks slowly. Brazil players get frustrated. Game goes on. It's just the best. I've never seen anything like it. And actually, I have. When we won the Champions League, we saw a lot of the same style from Modric, where he performs this sort of jiu-jitsu on the pitch, in my opinion, where he's just like, we know what you want to do when you play. Good teams want to press you. They want to win the ball. They want to make you defend in a block. So he sets up these like, and I feel like he coaches it into the team a little because of how influential he is. He gets these structures where he just floats around and toys with the other team's press. Sometimes you lose the ball. Sometimes Guardiola has to boot it long. But a lot of times the opposition are just running around and wasting their time, and they're exhausted.
And it's a really good way to demotivate opponents. See, I remember that like the one time that Real Madrid played Atalanta, I don't remember if it was Zapata or Muriel, one of them, who was saying like, we try to go and press them, but we were pressing against Kroos and Modric and we couldn't get the ball off them. And like and they actually admit it. Like, you lose motivation when when that happens, when you try to go for it and you just don't get the ball. And
Klopp had a similar quote too about Real Madrid with that. Yeah.
All right, so let's take that, and now, in my opinion, that jiu-jitsu kind of played into the goal, because essentially Brazil are up 1-0. All right, you finally get your goal on this sucker Modric and his team, and you want to pulverize them. And I don't know, the whole extra time, I just thought about how Rodrigo's coming on, and I'm like, yo, you've played with Modric. Are you not like trembling in fear about what his team could do to you? And it was so hilarious when they scored, and it was so hilarious that Casemiro and the team got caught out. It's so uncharacteristic of Casemiro to like let that sort of thing happen in that situation. But maybe it's like you have all this frustration that you're trying to let out on this team, and maybe that just lulls you into this false sense of not playing the game with the same heightened awareness Modric does. That's what it feels like. You're just like, you just get so frustrated, you start playing it emotionally instead of with this higher awareness that Modric always plays with. That's what I always get the sense whenever he plays anyone. And that's why I'm excited for Croatia, Argentina, because for me, Modric is now at the level, for me, he's not a forward. He doesn't score the goals, but he's at the level where he can be mentioned amongst the likes of Messi, Neymar, all these great players. It's Modric versus Messi in the semifinal for me. Messi is going to decide the game maybe, but Modric is going to decide how the game is played. Modric is going to decide how the game is played tactically, and he's going to make sure it's not played the way Argentina want it to be played. And that's what FIFA comes to be about. It's about eventually just denying the opponent what he wants and making sure it's in a risk-free way. And that's what I'm loving about some of this attritional football in the knockouts. I love it. Like, it's football is an extension of combat, and that's the way I see it. It's just a lot of fun.
So I think we need to talk about Modric like in detail right now, because 4 years ago, he was 33 in that World Cup, I think. And everyone was saying like, oh man, what Modric is doing now, this is the Zidane 2006. One last performance for the ages. And some of us joked like, 4 years from now, we don't rule it out. 4 years have flown by, and now this is the last. And I don't know, like, do we joke about it again 4 years from now? Like, he's 37, and I know people are like, man, stop talking about his age. Like, okay, we get it, 37, but like last night he had the most touches of anyone in the field, and I noted, like, going through my notes, he's basically done everything, the same good things he's been doing all World Cup. He's covering a lot of ground. He's vital in their chance creation from the right wing and the right half space. He's tracking. He's the funnel in possession. Bunch of other things I'm probably forgetting now. His ball progression is super important. But I feel like all of that good stuff, where I really, really noticed his presence was extra time when they needed a leader. He drops deep into a deep lying playmaking role and just calms their entire buildup down. He's spraying passes. And I just feel like you got to look around at that and be like, that's our leader. He's calm. He's got this. That confidence has to rub off on you. Like, to have that as your leader, be so confident. He's been here. He's seen it all. He's been through it all. Nothing phases him at this point. That's when I really, really, really felt his presence, was in that moment in extra time when Croatia were losing and on the brink of elimination. And I just feel like there's no greater sign of someone's greatness and their legacy as a whole when those are the moments you notice him, is in those moments. And, you know, like, we can talk about, like, every day after Twitter, we're going crazy. Oh man, that outside of the boot pass versus Getafe versus Levante. But then it's like, but then you also see him like just ripping PSG in the Champions League, being transcendent against City, against Liverpool, World Cup, Croatia. I don't know. Would you argue it? Because this was my argument at the beginning of the tournament. I think I underestimated Croatia. I said after that first game, if Croatia are to go far in this tournament, Modric is going to have to do more at an older age to carry this team, because it's just going to be more difficult. I think I underestimated a few things about this team. I think Kovacic and Brozovic are better now. I think Livakovic they didn't have Livakovic in 2018, although I don't know if necessarily goalkeeping was their problem or whatever, but Livakovic has been vital in this tournament. And they just, despite not having the Suker Mandzukic striker type, they got that kind of Real Madrid in them where it's like, just be efficient and stay cool under pressure and take care of business. And I don't know how long it lasts, but hey, man, I definitely did not expect that we have a possibility of a Croatia-France rematch 4 years later. I did not have that on the bingo card.
That would be quite something if it does happen. In the case, like, I think what we mostly underestimated about Croatia is that they are, in a way, they are a reactive team. Usually when I talk about reactive team, I tend to talk more about like defensive teams. So a team that's trying to defend another and trying to react to the different things that their opponent does. But Croatia shows that you can be reactive without necessarily being a defensive team. But that's the thing, like Croatia always is, it's a team that's really hard to nail down tactically, because a lot of how they play and how they tackle games will depend a lot on what their opposition is. And the thing is that they scale and change depending on their opponent. So they're never going to like overwhelm, like they're not going to overwhelm an opponent, overwhelmingly win, but they always do just enough to at least not lose. And they're really good at figuring out what those things are. And I mean, it kind of makes sense when you are led by Luka Modric, who's one of the best at figuring what needs to be done in game. So that's really the thing with Croatia. So maybe they can struggle against a lower level national team, but then somehow the game will still be really close when they play against a much better team. That's really how Croatia works. And we kind of forgot that. And maybe we forgot that a bit when we look through the group stages, that just, it doesn't necessarily, the fact that they could be struggling, a bit more. Actually, their game against Canada was pretty good. Then against Belgium, it looked really, really bad, but they still did enough, but they were still trying to keeping it close. But even in though, like, but that's the thing about Croatia. They're always good enough and they always react well enough to keep the game close. And they always find a way. To keep it close. And that's the important part of this team. And that's, of course, something that and it's quite interesting because it doesn't mean, like, I don't think they have like an outstanding, like, they're not like a super structured team, but they have a lot of individuals that are very smart tactically. Like Kovacic, now that he's matured, Brozovic, Modric, like especially the midfield ones, like these guys are really understand what needs to be done in the game, and they adjust depending on the situation. So it's just one of those, and it's very Real Madrid-esque, where like maybe there's not that strong of a structure, but we have this ton of smart players who know when and where to make the right decisions, and that's how we overcome opponents. And of course, all of this backed up by being psychologically a rock. I mean, my main thesis is that a lot of these guys grew up doing like the 90s Balkan Wars, and then they look at it like, it's just a football game. What's the worst that could happen? So like, and this is going to be like a very interesting situation, like in the Argentina game, because Argentina are a team that every time you look at these guys, they look like they're on the verge of a mental breakdown. We have a bunch of examples throughout the tournament, like when Aymar, as the assistant coach, was basically having a panic attack during the Mexico game. Right now, after Netherlands, they are just mouthing off everyone because they have so much pressure that they have to let out. And it gives me a lot of vibes of like Brazil in 2014, where the team had a lot of pressure and they always look on the verge of a breakdown. They had it against Germany. Maybe Argentina doesn't have that kind of breakdown, but like, it's a team that I think could be like, we have this team that looks a bit shaky psychologically against the most solid team psychologically in this tournament in Croatia. So I'm curious to see how that plays out and how each of them reacts to whatever things happen in the game.
Yeah, I agree completely. those are all great points as far as you guys really fleshed out what I meant by the Croatia Real Madrid comparison. That's exactly what I was sort of referring to. I think that's where Kovacic and Brozovic, they have the tactical maturity to execute that style, and Modric has the domain expertise to coach them into that style. So that's where I love Croatia. And yeah, I think looking at the rest of the tournament, then we have Croatia, we have Argentina, we have France and Morocco. I think assuming France are the favorite, and let's say we give them a disproportionate chance out of the 4 teams, I'd say I think Croatia might beat Argentina. Honestly, for some reason, I'm with Jose in that Modric. The main difference from 4 years ago, I think he's gotten even better at some of the real mental subtleties of the game. Like he's gotten used to playing on teams that aren't as good as what he had between 2014 and 18 and still winning. And I think that's sort of what we're seeing at this tournament. He's had so many constraints over the years that have forced him to evolve. He's learned to just roam more in different phases of different games. He's learned more dynamic solutions. But yeah, I think ultimately that game could go to penalties too. And I think both the games could go to penalties. So maybe all 4 teams are even. But right now I'm leaning more towards all 4 teams being even and penalty shootouts being likely than for France being the favorite. That's where I'm at right now.
It's funny that even Modric's like post-game quotes are all the same stuff like you hear in Real Madrid press conferences. Like, we have to know how to suffer. We suffered. And it's all so parallel to like watching Real Madrid play a lot of this stuff. But you know, I'm fascinated to see both of these semifinal ties. I didn't think we would be here really, but we are. And I guess I was going to slowly wrap it up, but because we've been recording for a while, I don't know, I lost track. But where are you guys on Brazil's performance? Tite got a lot of heat from a lot of people for subbing Vinicius off, for subbing Militao off. And Vinicius got subbed off in the 64th minute. Pretty early in this game for a player of his stature. I thought he played really well offensively. Maybe he was concerned with some of the Croatia transition attacks on that side. I don't know. Militao, I think, would have stayed on the field had he not been booked previously. There's that. But where are you on Brazil's performance? We can start with you, Jose, and Tite's decision in this game. Decisions.
Yeah, so I think the main issue I would say with Tite in Brazil is that they don't really have much. They don't really have much of a plan B. Like when Brazil needs to do something, Tite tries to like bring in, like, he does like man for man substitutions, but doesn't do any overall system change. So you kind of just expect, okay, let's just hope that this player is coming in better form, better shape than this other player and can do a better job. But it is a bit of a conservative substitutions in the sense that he doesn't really change that much in the system. Maybe players have a bit more freedom that they had in the first half, but it's like there isn't that much variation, and that does mean that sometimes it can get a bit harder for them to open up games like these, because they don't really, at least structurally, they didn't have any other alternative. The structure that we saw there is the same structure that they ended up the game with, and that's that. So structurally they struggle a bit more, but it kind of makes sense because Tite has so much individual talent that I can take out one talent, put another, and see if it does better. And it's quite frankly a strategy that has worked well for him. So I kind of get it, but of course it did show up as a bit of a limitation against Croatia. I still think that it's a bit, like, the criticism is a bit exaggerated, because even if they have that lack of structural diversity, to put it that way, they still created a lot against Croatia. So they still created enough to win, and they didn't end up winning it. Then onto the substitutions. The Vinicius one is the one I understood the least, because I think Brazil had gotten into that really nice dynamic where players are drawn into Neymar has so much gravity that he draws so many players into him. That creates a bit more space for Vinicius to do things. And it didn't happen too often, of course, because Croatia was defending well, but you still had those situations where Vinicius could go at them and try to open up some avenues towards chances. And that, but he does that because of his 1-versus-1 ability and because of the threat of his 1-versus-1 ability. You put Rodrigo in there, and it's not the same threat. I think for me, like if you're gonna put Rodrigo, like so. My main disagreement with Tite there is that I don't think you, in a game as close as this one, I don't think it's a good idea to take out who was probably your biggest 1-versus-1 threat apart from Neymar. Like, I think that actually made them worse rather than better. And I think it would, if you're going to play Rodrigo, it might have been a better idea to just kind of do it like a bit more like Real Madrid style of like put Rodrigo on the right and let him move to the center. But of course that goes a bit against like, but this is also the situation where like, this is also the kind of situation where Tite is not Ancelotti and he does not give his players that much degree of positional freedom where like Rodrigo can start on the right and then end up completely as a number 10. That's not the kind of team he sets up. I think it would have probably worked out better, but that's not how Tite works. And I think that's the main reason he just did the man-for-man substitution instead of trying to do something different, trying to get his right winger to be a bit more central. I think that would have worked out better than just subbing out Vinicius, who I think still had some gas in him to try to do a few more things. So that's the main one I disagree with. And overall, the main issue I thought, as I mentioned, was just the lack of kind of a plan B from Tite. But even with those criticisms, I do think Brazil could have been better, could have made some better choices. They still created a lot and were a bit unlucky not to get more.
Yeah, I think I largely agree. The problem with Rodrigo on the right, I would say, is that they don't really have a great offensive right back, so they needed the right winger to kind of space the pitch, and that made them very predictable in the end. It seemed like in some senses. Yeah. However, I agree. I think Vinicius had more gas, and I would have actually went with Rodrigo at striker, and because I think Rodrigo provides really good between the line support, and you actually pointed out during the game correctly that Rodrigo between the lines opened it up for Neymar's goal, and I believe you liked or retweeted something or tweeted about it, and and that's what I'd expected too, because I really didn't feel that their players were combining well between the lines, and Rodrigo's someone who has been forced to learn to do it because he's never got to play off the left, and that's the main thing. I would say the other thing is you need a strategy other than find Neymar between the lines. Like, come on, man! Like, everyone in the world knows what you're gonna do. It's just too I don't know, in those type of games, I just feel that like their players were too static positionally, and at the end of the day, I think they lost because of the jiu-jitsu, because you can't just try and once they started trying to pile on and get 2-3 on Croatia, yes, they should have got more, but that's why they lost, right? Like, they lost because they thought the same thing instead of defending.
Well, this was the first game, like, and as deep as Brazil are in attack, this was the first game I really felt like Gabriel Jesus would have been really huge asset to have to bring off the bench for that specific reason. Ooh, yes. To just have some unpredictable runs, and his off-ball movement is great, his dribbling is great. To get into those positions, I think would have been really helpful. I also found it really, and look, you two guys talking about like Brazil plan Bs or lack thereof. There was definitely, as good as Croatia were in winning the psychological battle and not cracking under pressure, Brazil missing chances. Brazil still had this in their hands. And when they concede the goal, their numbers are all over the place. Their players are all over the place. There's no defensive structure. They're committing way too many. And so little things like that, I think maybe another team just doesn't gamble with that stuff. But just going back to the Vinicius thing, I thought Vinicius was pretty dangerous in this game. I think like he had several really good cut-ins and give and goes in the box. One of them, I think Neymar should have actually laid it back off to him in the second half. I don't know if you guys remember that one. He plays a really nice 1-2 with Neymar in the box. And if he gets it back, he's wide open for a shot. Neymar decides to shoot instead. But he had a couple of those really nice interchanges in tight spaces on the left. And I'm not saying he was perfect or anything, but in terms of like having enough in the tank, I think he had a lot left in the tank, especially if this is going to be his, it was only 64 minutes in, and I thought he looked fine from an energy standpoint, but it is what it is. I think you could have either waited for Rodrigo or subbed him in a different position. But I do think, and related to this discussion, I was really fascinated with Neymar's role in this game. He looked like, I don't know if I've seen like maybe Messi, but I don't know to this degree, like a forward who's supposed to be a little bit more advanced in a central role, almost playing like a Toni Kroos role in this game, where he's dropping constantly like to the left back slot and just progressing the ball, but not in like a vertical distribution way, but trying to dribble past like the whole team from a deep position to just break lines. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes, funny enough, Modric would stop him. But I was fascinated by Neymar's positioning in this game. And it's, again, back to your point, Jose, you have so many options if you're this Brazil team. If you sub Vinicius off, you can just put Neymar in that left wing role and nothing really changes. But I mean, obviously Rodrigo took that role, but you have all these options to work with. Yeah, I just think that this was in Brazil's hands to a large extent.
Yeah.
And I think if you're Brazilian, if you're a Brazil fan, a Brazil player, coach, whatever, you're probably just not sleeping for several weeks after this, knowing that you had this and you were one of the best teams in the World Cup and you created a way, like enough chances to win this game. And you had a brain fart trying to commit numbers forward and conceded. And then you were in a, and then on top, the icing on the cake, Neymar doesn't even take a penalty. Where are you guys on that? Saving him for the fifth one. I don't like poor Rodrigo, like missing the penalty. Like I will never discredit a player for missing a penalty in a World Cup penalty shootout. Like that's just like, no. I'd literally just pee on the spot. Like if that was me. So I completely don't take anything away from players who miss in those situations, but I gotta like really question like what is the rationale behind him being the fifth one, fully knowing that there is a high chance that you're just not going to take one if you're the fifth one. Like it's math. There's a good chance that you're not going to be able to take a penalty. What's the logic of saving the player who can ease the pressure the most and is probably the best player on the field, at least for Brazil anyway? The guy who scored an amazing goal early in the game, has all the confidence in the world. What's the logic of not having him set the tone from the get-go? I just don't get it. I don't know if you guys had any thoughts on that.
Yeah. Then I think Ronaldo had something like that, like in 2012 or so. Yeah. Like, and then lesson learned, and then in the next few penalty shootouts, like he was shooting like first or among the first. So like that was lesson learned for Portugal. I guess Brazil didn't think of that one too hard. Then of course afterwards you see the next game, and I think like right after that Brazil thing, I think Argentina and Netherlands learned the lesson, and it's like, nope, screw it. Messi goes first and Van Dijk goes first and the leaders go first.
Yeah.
I'd just say Ronaldo still waited till the fifth one in the 2016 final. Don't forget, but that's because everyone made theirs. I have a feeling if we missed one, maybe he would have come on earlier. But I agree. I agree because Neymar. I don't know what the logic was, honestly. I honestly, penalty shootouts are tough, but I think if there's one thing I can agree on, it's like just get the leader to go first.
Yeah, I mean, or just like if you're saying it's not a confidence issue, right? Like in these situations, you want to go with the players who want to step up, supposedly, right? And obviously, it's not Neymar's not unconfident to take a penalty if he's like, I'm taking the fifth one, like that means he has the confidence to score his penalty and do the game-winning one. But they're all, maybe there's altering opinions on this, maybe there's altering science about this, but the way I look at it, every penalty is worth the same weight, and they're all worth the same, right?
I think if you want to put your star players out first, you're arguing that the psychology changes from penalty to penalty, and that it's
Yeah.
best to keep the pressure on most of your team down. In which case, the first penalty is the most important. Just starting
Yeah.
off well.
Right. Yeah, and that's the way I would see it too. Yeah.
And who like because I was also thinking, okay, maybe Rodrigo had like a Lucas Vasquez moment, and he's like, I want to do something important, I'm gonna go take it first, and like sure, and I get that, but I still think that Neymar in that case should have still been like among the first 3 penalty takers or something.
Exactly.
Like that.
Exactly. I think Rodrigo was actually a solid first pick, and it's unfortunate he missed, but Neymar should have been.
Yeah, I mean, like logically speaking, what we've seen, like Rodrigo's clutch factor in the Champions League, like fine, but Marquinhos number 4, that was a weird one. I mean, guess he has got experienced player, but yeah, Casemiro's penalty was badass. So was Pedro's actually. Pedro's was really good.
Yeah.
Casemiro's was crazy. Oh my god, I was just like, this guy was ready.
And then when he's laughing as he hands the ball off to Modric,
yes,
that was a moment. That was a hell of a moment.
And when they swap shirts at halftime, man, I was laughing. Like they swap shirts at halftime of the game.
Did they really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I mean, so what? Like, all the greatest players miss penalties. Do we have any moment to some words for Rodrigo? Like, you know, Ronaldo went through this, Ramos went through this when they were younger. They missed massive penalties in shootouts, but then I don't think it affected their. I think if anything, he just comes back stronger. So I just want to say I'm not worried about him. Is basically what I want to say.
These are moments of growth, of course. The best example was one of the best examples is of course Ramos. Ramos, after almost knocking off a satellite, like then he decides to become like a ridiculously good and confident penalty taker, and he grew from that experience. And I am sure Rodrigo will grow from that experience. And yeah, nothing more than also what Modric told him after the shootout. Like, it'll be fine. You'll learn from this. And as Real Madrid fans, we love him, so he'll be fine. He'll be fine. He'll learn from that. I do look forward to a more Vinicius and Rodrigo led Brazil in 4 years. That's all I'll say. I actually really look, because I think this was for Vinicius, especially for Vinicius's first World Cup, that was pretty fun. I think he had a lot of moments, even in the times when and even when Neymar was not there, he had a lot of moments where he looked like willing to step up and be the guy who got things done. So I think this bodes really well for 4 years from now when he has to take an even bigger leadership role in Brazil. Rodrigo also had some good cameos, so yep.
I was just going to say, with Endrick, don't forget Endrick, Rodrigo, Vinicius, front 3 and 4 years.
One last thing that we didn't touch on at all. Quick thoughts on Militao's performance at right back in this World Cup.
It's very Tite-esque in the sense that I mean, I think it fits the role. Like, it fits what Tite wanted of his fullbacks and give them more conservative roles. It's like when Luis Enrique decides to play like Azpilicueta as a right back, it's like, you know that they're not gonna bomb forward a lot, and it makes sense. So there's I still think it was a pretty reasonable thing what Tite was doing with his fullbacks, like having them just kind of stay back. A lot of the time they were kind of inverting, so staying like right next to Casemiro, like as a second defensive midfielder. So I think it made sense for what Tite wanted. Of course, I don't think I mean, the only but to that is just that, of course, Militao is not that reliable. Like, he just does, like, is not that reliable on the ball, or doesn't have that much of like a diverse passing skill set or range. But that being said, talking about range, the one pass that he does really nicely is those diagonals all over to Vinicius, which were really nice. We saw it a few times in that tournament. That's actually what I like the most about Militao in that position, that he got to hit those diagonals more frequently, and that was pretty fun.
The one overload that I can remember he had in this game was incredible. It actually nearly resulted in a goal for Brazil. And it was a rare moment where like you don't think of him as the kind of wingback who would do those overloads, but he did like at least one in that Croatia game, and it was pretty good. But and defensively, he was just pretty good this whole tournament, I'd say.
Yeah, he was just super. It was a super. A national team has many elite center backs, so plays one of them at fullback type of tournament. We see it all the time. We saw it with Ramos at Spain, and then we saw it with what's his name?
Koundé.
Lucas Hernandez with France 4 years ago. So this was just one of those, but he didn't win it, so it's a shame.
All right, let's wrap it here. I think we've exhausted it, and we didn't even dive into really Portugal, Morocco, or Netherlands, Argentina, which was the only thing I'll say is like I think there's too much football on the schedule, but if we just added one Argentina versus Netherlands annual, like in a cage,
yes,
I'd pay money for that. Don't care how tired those players are. Just put them in a cage and let them rumble. I'd love to see it. It was highly entertaining as a neutral. We need more trash talk. We need more drama. Highly enjoyed it. So that was fun. Yeah. Jose, thank you. Sid, thank you. We got to get you on more, buddy. So we got to get you hop on more often and break this down. If anyone listening to this wants our thoughts on Endrick, that happened over on patreon.com/Managing Madrid. Quite lengthy episode on Endrick on Thursday. That's exclusively for patrons, which also now has a Discord server, which you can join. So go over to patreon.com/Managing Madrid and access all of that. And thanks for listening, guys. Jose, thank you again. And Sid, thank you again. Peace.